Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The so-called Ring of Fire around Israel, which was conceived by Qassem Soleimani in the long years he headed the Revolutionary Guards Qods Force, was supposed to consist of Iranian proxies throughout the Middle East, ready to spring into action when ordered by Tehran. The first part, build-up, was essentially completed, but rather than wait for the order of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Islamist Hamas chose its own time to initiate the assault, with other members of this unholy alliance joining one by one, including Iran itself, whether gladly or reluctantly. What is the current situation in the seven-front war Israel is engaged in? Let's turn now to across the pond as we are welcoming our guest, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, formerly a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. It's good to see you, General.
Good to see you.
Pleasure is all ours. Also joining us from elsewhere in Israel is Major General in Reserve Gershon Cohen, formerly the IDF commander of the defense colleges in Israel, as well as an Army Corps commander. It's great to see you, General. And, of course, TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
Well, you know, Jonathan, there was a time when every Israeli schoolboy or schoolgirl learned that in 1948, or actually late 1947, 7 Arab nations attacked Israel. And now, after October the 7th, it's the 7 fronts led by Iran, which is not an Arab nation. All the other 6 are, namely, and some of them are not really nations, but organizations in control of territories. So we are talking about the Hamas-held Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and the West Bank, in addition to Iran. Right now, it seems as if most of the fighting is low intensity. But still, Israel is suffering casualties. Only today, another reserve soldier was killed in Lebanon by a drone. Attack hit his unit, and the Israeli stamina, both military and civilian, is being tested. It's been 410 days already. So while the 7 fronts cannot point to any tangible achievement, because Israel has managed to bounce back from the initial shock and, of course, has gone into Gaza and into the adjacent area to its border in Lebanon, and is striking back at the Houthis in Yemen and other enemies. Nevertheless, the war has gone very long, and it is probably time to get some arrangement so that the Israeli public, both in uniform and out of uniform, can breathe a little.
Indeed. With that being said, of course, from a historic context, a year of conflict is nothing. In most major wars fought on 7 fronts or even more, naturally in most cases.
When we look at other people's wars, I think this historical outlook is fine. But when we are both the victims and the fighters, not here in the studio, it's more burdensome.
Well, it's a type of fight here in the studio at times. But let's turn to Washington. General Kimmitt, I'd like to hear first your take on the Lebanese front, which is the key focus right now of the State of Israel. Of course, the United States is spearheading negotiations. We saw earlier today the Special Envoy Amos Hochstein traveling to Beirut, meeting with Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, and stressing the urgency of implementing some type of deal that would then alleviate not only prospects of wider escalation on the northern front, but also ensure a type of preservation of the state of Lebanon, something that the United States under the current administration is very keen on.
Well, two things I'd say. First of all, to address the point of the year-plus-long war that's been going on in Israel, it's notable that today is the 1,000th day since the Russian invasion inside of Ukraine. And again, another country that's facing, as Amir says, a lot of public pressure to come to some sort of resolution. And I think what is similar between the two situations in Ukraine and in Israel is we have an administration that has gone from really governing to trying to come up with some legacy items before they leave office. The good news is that means there's a little bit of extra energy coming out of President Biden's team, both in terms of Ukraine and also in Lebanon. But unfortunately, I think the participants recognize that there's a new team coming into town in January, and I don't think they're necessarily as anxious to come to a significant resolution in either Israel, Lebanon, or Ukraine, Russia, as perhaps the Biden administration is. So I'm not very pragmatic or hopeful that we're going to see any resolution in the near term, even when you have a person like Amos Hochstein driving those negotiations.
Indeed. Well, General Cohen, I'd like to hear your take on this, since we do see from an operational perspective, Israel is deepening now its ground maneuver into the second line of villages, expanding basically a certain buffer zone that would then degrade Hezbollah's terror infrastructure, both overground as well as subterranean infrastructure, alongside an increase of aerial sorties to include dozens of daily strikes against various Hezbollah targets, both in Dahan, Beirut, as well as the Bekaa Valley and elsewhere.
Actually, the Israeli strategic embarrassment connected to the fundamental principles of Hezbollah and Iran in the way they are perceiving and conceiving the war. To just emphasize the difference, the gap between Israel and all the other players in that ring of fire built by Qassem Soleimani, is that right now the main expectations of Israel is to achieve stability, to bring an end to the war by agreement. Maybe it's the only way to bring an end, but it means that our goal is very, very complicated to be achieved. On the other side, the main goal of Hezbollah, guided by Iran, is to keep the momentum of open-ended war against Israel, attrition war. It means that all they need to fulfill that goal is just to launch several missiles or drones every day. Haifa and all other places in Tel Aviv, in Israel, including Tel Aviv, cannot really come back to normal life, and they, in that way, could prevent from Israel the control upon bringing an end to the war. It is a basic strategic asymmetric, and the only way I can see that could change that embarrassment is with the support of United States.
With that being said, in such a reality or such a scenario, Israel would, of course, engage in escalation dominance in a very rapid manner in order to ensure that this would be rooted out at the core, something that would threaten regional escalation. So this is also a calculus that the adversaries of Jerusalem need to take into account. Mr. Owen.
Well, two remarks. Of course, people who live in the north, from Haifa northward, undergo constant air raids, sirens, and sometimes rocket and missile hits. and they live quite differently than those who live 40 kilometers and more south of the border. So not to belittle what they undergo, but in Tel Aviv and other places, the novelty has worn off. So we hear the sirens. We know that we have to wait 10 minutes in-house in order for the debris, mostly, not to hit us, because these are very heavy pieces of metal. If you saw them, it can ruin your day if it falls on your head. But other than that, it has become just another routine. However, what happened in Iran is that once the potential became the actual, the ratio of forces is in Israel's favor now. Now that the Iranians have tried their hand at what was always considered the biggest missile arsenal in the Middle East. So twice they launched hundreds of projectiles at Israel, causing minimal damage. Every small act of terror perpetrated by someone with a knife or a car causes more casualties than these hundreds of projectiles. And Israel, when retaliating, managed to peel off the Iranian air defense array and demonstrated its ability to hit targets in an even more effective fashion. So right now, compared to October of 2023, Israel is in a better position vis-a-vis Iran.
Indeed. Well, General Kimmitt, I'd like to move to the Syrian theater in context, of course, with Iranian efforts to, on the one hand, transport or smuggle weaponry from Iran through Iraq, through Syria into Lebanon, on the one hand. On the other hand, we're also seeing now that Hashd al-Shabi, particularly Kataib Hezbollah, taking over a couple of swaths of territory, if I may call it that, in the Al-Bukamal, Al-Mayadin regions in order to accept new recruits into the ranks of various Iranian proxies and then prepare them for whatever the Ayatollah regime deems fit. What can you tell us about that? To what degree are the Syrians now, with the foreign minister of Syria also currently in Tehran meeting with his counterpart to deliberate much of the collaboration between the two nations, a point of concern for the United States, which has also been subject to repeated attacks against U.S. service members in the various installations from Green Village to all the way to Al-Hasaka?
Yeah, I think this goes back to our earlier comments about what the Biden administration is willing to do in the near term. I think it will be completely different after President Trump comes in. But at this point, the only policy seems to be continue the support of the YPG forces, continue the support against al-Qaeda efforts and the remnants of ISIS in Syria, but do nothing else. I don't think that the United States is interested in intervening to cut those lines of communication between Iran through Iraq and Syria down into Lebanon. So I don't think that you're going to see any new initiatives in terms of trying to interdict those lines anytime soon.
And what are the implications, not only from an Israeli perspective, but also from a Jordanian perspective that has been dealing with a lot of challenges to its north on the Syrian front, be it the smuggling of munitions as well as other illicit materials, including drugs that have plagued much of the GCC countries, which syndicates, particularly of the Muslim Brotherhood, have been utilized by Iranian proxies to transfer those various products or commodities through Jordanian territory.
Yeah, I just came back from the region, and the amount of captagon that is being exported and used throughout the region is just stunning. It is starting to approach the fentanyl crisis that we have in the United States. But look, I think we can all accept the fact that this is just a tentacle of the octopus, that if you really want to have an effect on these issues, it's not going to come by operations inside of Syria or inside of Iraq. It has to be further action towards Iran. And I'm cautiously optimistic that this next administration understands what needs to be done, and in fact will do something that the current administration is unwilling to do, which is try to cut that oil tie between Iran and China, which is essentially providing the dollars and the goods that Iran needs to continue their activities. But the fact remains is the Iranian oil production has gone up by about 500,000 to 750 million barrels per day, and all of that is being bought by China. China doesn't seem to want to accept the embargoes and accept the sanctions that we put on Iran. And as long as that happens, candidly, this will continue to a great extent without some level of warfare. But the team that's coming in, very, very hawkish on China, and perhaps that might be the backdoor way into resolving some of these issues at the head of the octopus rather than in the tentacles.
Indeed. Well, staying with Syria and also the border of Iraq and Syria, the Al-Bukamal region, General Hakohen, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Actually, we must call the American administration to pay more attention to what's going on in Jordan. Jordan is a key point in the whole plan of Qassem Soleimani, and it was yet not accomplished because the kingdom yet existing instability. And what they are trying to do against the kingdom is just to make Jordan part of the whole ring of fire against Israel, actually really to destroy the stability of the kingdom with a lot of militia forces from Iraq and Syria. And it is not just a threat of small terroristic groups. It is a threat that organized by Iran, and therefore we must be very careful by taking seriously that threat. Beyond that, and the Americans are really understanding this concept, their main idea of Iranian is a concept of deniability. They just want to deny not only the stability of Jordanian kingdom, of course, the stability of Israel, they are making all effort to deny the influence of America as a superpower in the region. And they are doing that very cleverly, even in Iraq, because actually they could be very happy with the outcome that in Iraq was elected in democratical process, a president, not president, prime minister, but yet he is quite dependent upon the militia that guided by Iran. By that, the Iranians are penetrated with the idea like cancer, with denying the whole effort of American to create stability in the region. And in this trend of deniability of American influence, the Russians are partners in all aspects.
Indeed. Well, there is chatter about, of course, communications between the Americans and Russians in all that has to do with Syria and Lebanon in particular. But I'd like to ask General Kimmitt, because I'll go back once more to the deployments, of course, and the recruitment of new militiamen by Kataib Hezbollah into a sort of new regime of the RGC Quds Force in the Al-Bukamal and Al-Mayadin regions of Syria, rather than in Iraq proper, where Kataib Hezbollah is much more active and powerful. when we look on the last several years back, and actually 10 years back, we saw in 2014 Ayatollah Ali Khamenei coming out and declaring that the underbelly of the State of Israel is the so-called West Bank, districts Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, with Iranian efforts to smuggle or to flood those territories with both weaponry, munitions, as well as finances. Immediately after this declaration, Qassem Soleimani erected Liwa Fatimiyun with Afghan volunteers and Liwa Zainibiyun with Pakistani volunteers in the area of Abu Kamal. Some of those forces were depleted over the course of the civil war in Syria. Nevertheless, it seems like the Iranians are very deliberate in deploying additional forces along the Syrian front with Jordan and also the Iraqi front with Jordan from those two areas, putting a lot of strain on the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And I know that the government of Iraq, the Baghdad Central government with Prime Minister Shia al-Sudani being between the rock and the hard place in this context, nevertheless, what can be done in order to confront this challenge?
Well, first of all, in terms of what's happening inside of Syria, again, I don't think the United States is doing much more than force protection of its own units and assistance to the YPG. Look, on the issue of Jordan, every day you wake up and Jordan is still standing is a good day. This is not a new problem. It's been that way for the last 20 years. And I think that the United States certainly recognizes what needs to be done inside of Jordan, and in many ways is quietly doing it. There are more United States forces in Jordan than have ever been in history, primarily focused elsewhere, but that still is a pretty good deposit on the territory of Jordan to ensure its stability. In terms of Iraq, you're right. Shia al-Sudani is in between a rock and a hard place, but it doesn't seem that the militias, the Iranian-backed militias, have as much sway inside the country as they did this time last year. I wouldn't call that an improvement, but I don't think it's getting worse, even though it may not get any better.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to move to another theater. We don't have very much time left for that, but nonetheless, it's important to touch on. Mr. Oren, briefly, Ansar Allah, which is dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, another Iranian surrogate or proxy, whatever we define it, continues to disrupt freedom of navigation in the strategic strait of Bab el-Mandeb, as well as the adjacent waterways, hammering down on the economy of Egypt in particular, but of course Sudan also and other countries that used to enjoy those trade lines and were vital to their economies. What is being done right now? We saw, of course, an American strike not so long ago. Nevertheless, it is just limited.
Well, it's hard to sympathize with the Egyptians. Let them take care of their own problem. Why should we worry about the Egyptian economy when they do not see fit to fight the Yemenites because of whatever interest they perceive? But as for Israel, you know that for the 10 years preceding October the 7th, the Israeli Defense Forces under Chiefs of Staff Gantz and then Eisenkot, especially Eisenkot, perfected the fusion between intelligence and Air Force employment because it was not in areas adjacent to Israel itself, such as South Lebanon or Gaza. And this is still valid for Yemen or for Iraq and for Iran itself, even though infantry and other ground forces are committed to Gaza and Lebanon. So once the political decision is made, Israel has the capability to hit those targets and hit them hard.
We're drawing near to the end of the program. Each one of you will get roughly 45 seconds. For that, we'll start with General Cohen. I will highlight, and this is something that General Kimmitt mentioned earlier, it's all nice to see the extensive efforts against the various proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but unless Iran pays a price, this war will rage on. General Cohen, the floor is yours.
Sometimes experts trying to deny that there is a process of a new phenomena of warfare, that everything is taking a new direction. And actually it is. For the first time, Israel engaging not just with several states and military organizations and as it happened in the past. The main change is that all of them are guided by radical jihad logic, guided by the inspiration of Abdullah Azzam in Afghanistan. All of them, the Houthis, the militia in Iraq, of course, Hezbollah and Hamas. And this in itself, taking the whole phenomena to just a new demand for a new strategy.
Indeed. General Kimmitt, 30 seconds.
Very quickly, I think one of the issues that isn't being watched is the increasing Russian support inside the region, particularly to the Yemeni forces, the Houthi forces. They can bring in anti-tank, anti-ship capabilities that would have a disastrous effect on our operations in the Red Sea. So I think today that's my major concern of what's happening in the Red Sea area.
Indeed, Mr. Owen.
So as we started, it's the Trump administration watch. We're waiting to see whether come January 20th, there will be a new age.
Thank you. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Kimmitt, General Cohen, and Mr. Owen for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.